What's up, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Bookworm's Book Corner, where we talk all things books. I'm your host, Elizabeth Berg, and tonight I want to start off with a question. What would you do to find your missing child? How far would you go? Here's another question. What if the one person you usually can rely on is the one person you can't? That person being yourself. Those are questions that we're going to be asking and answering today when we talk about All the Dangerous Things by Stacy Willingham. So grab your drink of choice. Tonight I have my sparkling water in a sloth cup, and let's start talking. So if you are new to my channel, welcome. This is how we usually run down our book reviews. We do a book walk. After we do a book walk, we read through um the book cover or the book backing, depending on if it's hardcover or paperback. We do logistics where we talk about, how many pages, where is it from, when was it printed. And afterwards, I give you my honest to goodness thoughts on the story. So without further ado, let's get started. First things first, here's our book. Let's take a quick book walk. So as you know, it is a hardcover, and as you can see, I did annotate this book. So that is something that we're going to be talking about tonight, is my thought process while annotating this novel. It is a book of the month. So something like I've said before, without the dust jacket, it's kind of like bleh, which is not something I'm a fan of, but when you pay, instead of paying $30 for a hardcover and you pay 10 to 15, um, you win some, you lose some. Looking at, the pages, so I like the color of the page. It's not a stark white. It's not that weird gray color or weird tan color. It's a nice basic, cover color. Um, the consistency of the page is nice. It's not too thin. It's not too thick. The reason why I know this, so this is one of the pages I heavily annotated, and it is thick enough that it didn't bleed through onto the back. One thing I will say that I really like about Book of the Month is that the font of the books are big enough. So I definitely felt more comfortable annotating this novel instead of, for example, annotating a paperback like Outlander. I keep bringing up Outlander, but it's one of the really best examples I have where the font is really tiny. Um, I want to read The Priory of the Orange Tree, and it is an over 800-page novel. And so, in order to conquer that book, I really want to be able to annotate it because it has multiple viewpoints. So this is definitely good practice, and I like how I did it. So I'm going to talk to you about why I did the way I did um, in a little bit. But other than that, logistic wise, when you look at the book, it's not too heavy. Um, it looks like it's in pretty decent condition for the fact that I carried this around all week. So it held up quite nice. Let's talk about the innards of the book. So, as I said, Stacy Willingham wrote our novel. It is from my Book of the Month collection. I got it in December of 2022 as part of my box. It was an early release. It came out in 2023. There are 320 pages in this novel. That does not include the author's note. And I highly recommend reading the author's note afterwards because it was very interesting the way the author wrote this novel. And there are a lot of spoilers if you read it beforehand, so don't do that. But once you've read it, oh, cat's doing zoomies. Do not mind that. Um, it makes a lot of sense. So I really recommend reading the author's note. Book of the Month does this thing where it highlights, the tropes. And a lot of the reasons why I pick some of the books that I do from Book of the Month is because of the tropes. So just like when we talked about romance novels having tropes, like Rumpy Sunshine, age gap's a trope. Um, friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, so forth, etc. They have tropes highlighted. So obviously, this is a mystery thriller, but it has what we call a nonlinear timeline. And we're going to talk about that nonlinear timeline a lot in this video. Puzzle, an unreliable narrator, and mama drama, which when I saw that, I was like, oh boy. So it obviously, I had to get it. One thing I want to highlight is it's not a very difficult read per se. For 320 pages, I started it on 6/9, so June 9th, and I finished it on 6/15th. The 6/15, so June 15th. So it took me about 7 days to complete this book. You know, few chapters here or there. So it wasn't one of those books where I had felt like I needed to sit down and read from cover to cover. There were some pretty slow parts. We're going to talk about that as well. But it took me about a week, which I find a pretty decent amount of time because some books can be a lot harder to get into. So that was the book Logistics. Now, let's read The Dust Jacket. So as you know, Book of the Month has The Dust Jacket. Normally I'd read any reviews. There are not any reviews for this book, but let's find out what The Dust Jacket has to say. 1 year ago, Isabel Drake's life changed forever. Her toddler son Mason was taken out of his crib in the middle of the night while she and her husband were asleep in the next room. With little evidence and few leads for the police to chase, the case quickly went cold. However, Isabel cannot rest until Mason is returned to her, literally. Except for the occasional catnap or small blackout where she loses track of time, she hasn't slept in a year. Isabel's entire existence now revolves around finding him, but she knows she can't go on this way forever. In hopes of jarring loose a new witness or a buried clue, she agrees to be interviewed by a true crime podcaster. But his interest in Isabel's past makes her nervous. His incessant questioning, paired with severe insomnia, have brought up uncomfortable memories from her own childhood, making Isabel start to doubt her recollection of the night of Mason's disappearance, as well as second guess who she can trust, including herself. But she is determined to figure out the truth, no matter where it leads. Following up her instant bestseller, A Flicker in the Dark, Stacy Willingham delivers a totally gripping thriller about a desperate mother with a troubled past. So, the first thing I want to talk about real quick is the nonlinear timeline. So, the best way to explain it is like this. A nonlinear timeline is where you have different chapters that bounce back and forth, kind of in a weird way, like ping pong. I'm trying to see if I have. Actually, yes. Let me show you this way. And yes, I'm going to use my journal, my beautiful journal for this, folks. So, as you can see, it's my new journal too. With a nonlinear timeline, when you read a mystery novel that doesn't have one, it normally just goes in a straight line. It starts from point A to point B. Okay? Now, the thing is, though, about a nonlinear timeline is that it can go from here to here to here to here to here. So it doesn't go in a straight line. And that's really important for us to know as a reader because basically, Isabel, it's not a spoiler because it literally, that's how it is. Isabel has a troubled past. We know this. And we don't know what that troubled past is until partway through the book. And the reason why we know it is because it bounces from the present slash, recent past. So, like, while she still had her son, when she was with her husband, and so forth. But then it bounces to when she was a child, when she was a little girl. And that is why it makes it a nonlinear timeline because you're bouncing back trying to put the clues together like a puzzle. Um, this nonlinear timeline, if you are not paying attention, can be confusing. So for people who read real quick, um, the chapters are broken up into like now versus, for example, let me find a page. Um, if it's still in the now, it doesn't, change. But then it says then. So it does say clearly now versus then. Um, the big thing, going back to the question I ask you, how far would you go? Um, Isabel cannot sleep. Um, when you think about the brain for anybody who is, it's not even a medical thing, it's just a common knowledge. You can't really go very long without sleep. Um, That's also why, for example, mental illness is really important to take care of because your brain is an important part of your body. It's an important organ. And when an organ gets sick, when your body gets sick, it needs to be taken care of to get better. That's why mental illness is such a big issue that needs to be talked about. And I'm glad as I've gotten older that it's become more of something that people can talk freely about. Um, for Isabel's sake, she went from, sleepwalking to now not sleeping at all. And we get these glimpses of her old life with her ex-husband. And I say ex because it's not a spoiler. That's really major. It's one of those like within the first chapter or two. Because of, her husband leaving, it's another piece to that like heartbreak for Isabel. Her husband left because she can't get over the loss of her son. Um, her husband thinks he's dead, and she's like, he's not, he's just missing. We'll have to find him. And you have that piece where the people are like, well, obviously she did something to the son. And why it becomes an unreliable narrator is due to her not sleeping. She's beginning to remember things differently. She's remembering things from her past. She's putting different pieces together, and she begins to wonder if she herself did something to harm Mason. And it's a tough thing to read, especially when you really want, like being a romance reader. I like reading books that have a happily ever after. It's nice to have a book that, has a happy ending. Oh, I have the hiccups, excuse me. Obviously, murder mysteries, horrors, and thrillers are not going to have that. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Happily ever after. However, there's good endings and then there's bad endings. Isabel is trying to figure out, what really happened to her son. And she's using the form of a podcast to help her through it. She did these like true crime talks, like a TED talk. That's where we first meet her. Is she's literally about to do this crime symposium, and what's so profound is I'll even read this like quote. It's one of my favorite quotes. Highlighted. That's right. Haha, I annotated it. The truth is, people love violence, from a distance, that is. Anyone who disagrees is either in denial or hiding something. You see, I am a big like forensic files person. I enjoy true crime. I watched, like BuzzFeed Unsolved, and I liked watching, um, now it's The Watcher with Shane Madej and Ryan Bagara. Like, I enjoy those things. And it's not because of a weird, curiosity, a morbid curiosity. I grew up watching with my nana and my mom, Hallmark with Jessica Fletcher as Murder She Wrote. Or Angela Lansbury, excuse me, as Jessica Fletcher in Murder She Wrote. Columbo, um, Heart to Heart. or Perry Mason, Matlock. It's just I enjoy watching those crime shows. And then when like I got older, I've also watched, CSI and CIS. So like it's not a far stretch to like true crime. And so she goes to these like true crime symposiums trying to plead her case to these people, and she's like scripting it. And when she talks to this guy, it becomes very unscripted, it becomes personal. And like something that really was eerie was the way they describe darkness. When you're alone in the dark, are you really that alone? And to me, that is very profound because that's partly why, when I lived in my college dorm, in the middle of literally nowhere, I always had my windows shut if I could, unless I had to have my fan on. And if I did, I always had like something close by to like bap somebody with. Or when I lived on my own, and even though I live like in an apartment where I'm not on the bottom floor, you know, how alone really are you? Like that's really the biggest thing here. Mason, her son, disappeared from his crib and there were no footprints, and it was so random. And it's so spooky to me when you live in a world where, because it's realistic. Like when I walk home at night or when I'm out and about in a parking lot, whether I'm at, Walmart or Target, how alone really are you? And that's a really big theme that you have in this book. Another big theme, other than, the dueling perspectives of then and now, is really wondering, who are you as a person? Now, I won't go into this too deeply because I don't want to give spoilers that will impact, your quality of reading. But when you read the then and the now, the reason why the then is so important is really to come down to it. The past that she has, she can't even really think about. And what she does think about, impacted her for the rest of her life. Now, this other traumatic thing occurs in her life, and she's wondering if she caused it again. And to me, it's a very difficult thing when you really take back and look at the human psyche. Um, how much really is it her fault? As a woman, women get blamed and charged at things for different reasons. So, for example, um, if you're a woman who has children, for example, and this is like they claim that she is the one who kidnapped and hurt her son. And that's not spoiler because it's literally within like the first couple chapters of the book. Women in our society are made to feel guilt, whether it's something they did or whether it's something they didn't. So if you turn down somebody, um, I turned down this guy, okay? Um, I felt guilty for doing so, not because he was a mean guy, but because I wasn't ready to start dating. It scared the crap out of me. That doesn't make me a bad person, but I look back and I'm like, what if? Like the guilt. Um, am I a good pet mom? Like there are days where I'm like, did I not give my pets enough food? They are my fur babies. And like the guilt that women are put through is sadly a normal thing. Women literally, and men, let's just not even say women and men, people shame other people for existing and doing things. Oh, you're not dressed appropriately, or oh, you don't eat healthily enough, obviously, because you're overweight or you're underweight. So obviously you're starving. Like the amount of stigma that people have against each other is ridiculous. But like in this book, it adds another layer of the human psyche of like she's looking for her son. Half the people think she's the one that did something. And then like there is this one like true crime case, and the thing is, and it brought this whole question of the more you tell somebody something, the more likely they start believing it's true. So, like, she begins to question if she really did something to hurt Mason. And so, all this time, she is trying to just figure out the truth. Now, it's not until the very, like, end. Let me see. There we go. Not until like the last not even 50 pages. It's where it's finally starts to speed up. That is my one thing I will say about this book that I wasn't a fan of is how slowly it built. Um, when you're reading this book, like it has some really profound quotes. So for example, doesn't it any part of her death think it was making it convenient? What do you mean? I ask, even though I know what it means. I don't want to hear him say it. It looks bad. Having an affair. It wasn't an affair. Like these pieces like are being thrown at you. And that's also how I annotated my book. I annotated it by important pieces. So there were pieces where I felt that it was very profound. Like, why have I channel? Is because with the podcast, you don't have to talk to a lot of people, not directly anyway. You just have to talk to me. Like, I find it easier to talk about books on a camera because I sometimes scare people. I get really excited and I kind of overwhelm people. I don't mean to, but it happens. My bad. But like for example, parts that I wanted to remember or puzzle pieces. So like for example, does she have trauma? Does she have PTSD? It comes at me in flashes. Something of a nightmare. Me creeping down a hallway not to get caught. Dad pacing the halls, white knuckles around a bottle of brown liquid, while my mother splayed on a mattress, the sheets staining red. Like I literally was like, what happened? Like the way the author built the pictures that you have in your head. She did a fantastic job explaining it to you. However, there were times where it got a little slow. There were also parts, like different aspects to the mystery. So, for example, you have Isabel's past that you have to figure out. You have a couple other murders that you hear about that you're not really sure how it relates, but somehow it relates. And then finally, you get back to Mason. And the ending, I don't know how I felt about the ending. Is there a good ending? Yes? Question mark? I'm not really sure how to explain it because part of me likes the ending, but part of me was like, are you flipping kidding me? Why? So I'm only just going to stop right there because anymore and I will spoil the book. So, how did I annotate? Like I said, I used flags. I aesthetically colored flags that go with the book. I use a highlighter set and I use like a specific color. I'll put in my link down below the color, like the highlighter thingies. So if you want to buy them, because I really like that they didn't bleed through. So, like, when I highlighted and underlined things, most of the time when I annotated, it was to, like, keep my thoughts. So, for example, like, this is a spoiler right here, so I'm not going to read it. But, like, it was my thoughts that I needed to put together. So, like, this whole entire chapter of, like, from then was super important to me that I, like, just flagged it and then I wrote this whole chapter. like very profound. I knew what they expected, that everything was good, everything was fine. In fact, no, everything was perfect. Like, there are some very profound quotes in here. And, like, even though some of my thoughts were wrong, like, I had some really, like, odd ideas about what was really happening that weren't really the case. It really made me, like, think deeply into this book, and I'm really glad that I did annotate, because annotating kind of not forces you, but it makes you really, like, take it to a deeper level. Um, like, this whole chapter, like, I was literally reading this, okay? And my coworker was across from me, and she's just, like, laughing because I'm like, red flag. Big red flag. Oh my god, not romantic in my opinion. It makes me feel really gross. And I'm just like, these are things I want to remember. And you're probably wondering, why do you want to remember that? When I go back and, like, go flip through this book again, I want to remember, the important pieces. And, like, that was a really important piece that I needed to remember. And so when the ending happened, I flipped back and I was like, oh my God, like, the clues were there. So I gave this book a 4 stars on Goodreads. I put it a like on my book of the month account. Will I read it again? I'm not 100% sure. Um, it was okay. It was good. I liked it. It wasn't my favorite because there were some parts that were really slow, but it wasn't super slow to the point where it was unbearable. Um, like, maybe it was just me being impatient, but I really did appreciate this book because it really made me think about, when your brain is who you normally rely on, and she couldn't even rely on herself to figure out what was happening. She had to really, like, take a step even further back and, like, go into her past to figure out what was really the truth. So I do recommend reading All the Dangerous Things. I do want to read her other book, Flicker in the Dark, but that will be for another story for another time. So I hope everyone has a good evening. I hope you enjoyed the wonderful book review of All Those Dangerous Things. And I hope everyone had a wonderful Father's Day. Have a good evening, everybody. And until next time, bye bye.